Today's card of the day is an oldie, but a goldie. Thoughtseize, a black for a sorcery that lets you reveal target player's hand. You choose a 9-line card from it, that player discards that card, and you lose 2 life. First glance, it seems pretty strong, and I think a majority of you guys who think that way are probably right. This is a really strong card. The best part about this card is it seems to be mostly used in context for interaction, which means mostly that there's no real crazy way for you to abuse this card. Okay, you can select yourself to discard a card, but like, let's be real, this is mostly used for interaction. And being in black and 1 mana means it's gonna stop a lot of those nasty keeps, especially with people who aren't really understanding that you're playing black and you have Thoughtseize in hands. This will definitely ruin their day because you can make them discard any card that they're really working to play pretty early, and it just makes it so much easier to play the game when you're playing Thoughtseize, especially when you're being maybe even a little more proactive than usual. This card lets you set up and makes people play against you blindly be punished by keeping hands that they've molded, which can be a good thing or a bad thing. I've noticed that when I'm playing against black, when I used to play modern and I played against gen decks, you always keep your hand when you play against a gen deck. Like no matter how crappy it is, I feel like most of the time it's right to keep it because they will have thought seizes and they'll just have ways to keep tearing that hand up and going top deck mode, and you just cannot top deck mode against gen. And I think that's what Thoughtseize is good at, just interacting at a different level. It's in my opinion, it's kind of like removal in a sense that it lets you remove the actual thing before it gets played. Sort of similar in the way that counterspells are used and how they're like ubiquitously good, is that it stops the problem before the problem even becomes a thing. And that's strong for 1 mana. Like losing 2 life to get rid of perhaps some like crazy destructive thing against you is like pretty good. Other problem with this card though is, of course, it has to be played prior to the actual event, which means it's probably not good when you top deck this. But being 1 mana and a top deck, it's probably not the worst, right? But it doesn't remove it from the field, so it's gonna be a problem if you do top deck this later. Losing 2 mana like, with this card as well is losing 2 health rather. It's probably pretty bad against aggro decks. While it is nice to get like perhaps you can get like a bolt and you save yourself 1 life with this. Usually it doesn't interact with the board, and aggro is all about dumping their cards onto the board. And so this essentially does nothing to aggro decks really, because they don't really care what you're getting out of their hand first, because most of the time it's like they have such a high consistency of cards that they'd rather just dump out. When you want to play your second or third Thoughtseize, usually there's not going to be much in their hand that they want to get out that already isn't out yet. It usually becomes a dead card. And also, this ends up backfiring at you because not only are you playing a card that doesn't really interact with the board, which is what red does, play to the board, it's also helping them with their strategy, which is you're losing your life. So there's pros and cons to this card. Being able to interact is really good. However, at the cost of life is probably what makes this card fair, especially when you're playing against aggro decks. You definitely want to take this card out. If you're playing against control decks, this card is pretty decent. Yeah, it's a good card. I know a lot of people hate to see it because if you're playing, you're mulling or something like that, this makes a lot of games non-games at times. But generally, I think it's fine because it's just an interaction at low mana, which causes for perhaps even longer slash more interactive games or maybe more interesting games, perhaps. But that's just my opinion. I think Thoughtseize is a relatively fine card. I think if you up this to 1 mana or 2 mana and allowed you to reveal and choose land cards, this would probably be fine too as well. But you'd need to lose 2 life still, perhaps. That's even more broken though. I'm not that big of a fan of Thoughtseize, but it's a good card. I think you play this. In context of EDH, I think it's still probably playable. I think a lot of times you'll know what deck can beat your deck. And if you're playing Thoughtseize and you see what deck is doing, then and you don't have to reveal information to everyone, but if you could see this, understand like, hey, that guy has counterspell in his hand or something like that, you don't have to get rid of the counterspell. All you have to do is make sure you play, sort of, subtly knowing that they have counterspell in hand, and you're waiting for someone else to cause that counterspell to be used. There's a lot of applications to it, even in a multiplayer context. It's just this overall pretty decent card, and you could probably play it in your black deck. I think at least one of it's 2 life in a 40 life format. Not that bad, not that bad at all. But of course, tell me what you guys think in the comments below. I'd be interested in seeing if Thoughtseize is what you guys think is pretty decent. I know I started playing Bolt, I think Thoughtseize is definitely one of the other ones that could be played that people usually don't look too deeply into in Commander. So yeah, tell me what you guys think about it. Comment below. Peace out.